craft and publish your memoir. So once again, thank you all for coming. Thank you, Brenda.
My special guests tonight, I'm so excited to announce, are Maureen Michelson, who's there in the white shirt, who is your local independent publisher and editor-in-chief at New Sage Press, which is there in Troutdale, Oregon. And she has decades of editorial experience and brilliance that she is going to share with us tonight.
Don't make me sound that old. Maybe a couple.
And then Marlene Blessing in the green Northwest kind of vest, who is another of my longtime editors. I trust both of these with my life's work. And I did a book called Singing to the Sound with Maureen, Northwest essays, nature essays. And I did a book a long time ago with Marlene called Living by Water. Thank you.
Thank you. Somebody knows it.
Thank you. Well, here's the original team that dreamed that up. And she is a wonderful editor and publisher of 3 different publishing houses. So we have wonderful, experienced people to guide us tonight. And a Microsoft editor who is really smart and who is also a memoirist. And both Marlene and Lindsay are in my evening advanced memoir class. So we can ask them questions. I want you to be thinking about questions, anything, because look at the wealth of experience in publishing and writing that you have here tonight, thanks to Powell's. So, to get started, I know that everyone likes handouts, kind of the old show and tell. So, sir, would you hand these out? This is 10 tips for writing successful memoir. And it's going to be on the Random House, which is our distributor for this book. It's going to be on their website, but you get the first copies. And I have taken a lot of breakouts in the book and also added some just for my audiences. And on the back, you will see that there is a wonderful event that happened last week, which is that Oprah.com chose this book.
Oh, wow.
That's pretty thrilling to be anointed by Oprah. And we're thrilled. And I tell a little story. Sarah Jane, my co-author, who's a literary agent in New York, very, very elegant, very wonderful, my longtime literary agent. When we were doing the proposal of this book, it took us 6 months to write the proposal, and I published 18 books. So proposals are really, really important if you're going to sell a book to a traditional publisher. So as we were writing this proposal, we had a little, very unusual kind of spat. And I said to her, I'm doing a book for writers. I'm not a self-help book. And she said, we should be so lucky. And as it turns out, Oprah has led in choosing this for a wonderful self-help book. And as many of you know, how many of you are writing memoir actively now? Excellent, excellent. A good part of the crowd is writing memoir. How many of you are writing spiritual memoir? How many of you are writing family memoir? Okay. How many of you are writing travel memoir? Excellent. How many of you are writing travel memoirs with family?
That's too scary.
Don't want to go there. One of the things that we did was divide. This is 30 years of teaching for me and 30 years of selling wonderful books for Sarah Jane. And we decided, let's break it down into 2 parts. The first part, part 1, is how to craft your memoir. The second part is getting serious about publishing. So I wanted to ask, how many of you are here tonight to learn about the craft of memoir? Excellent. That helps me navigate the talk. How many of you are here to talk and learn about publishing memoir? Okay. either independently publishing. I know that Powell's has a espresso book machine. Yes.
Yes, I do.
And when I did my YA novel called The Drowning World, which was my first experience in indie publishing after all these traditional books, I went to Espresso Book Machine and had a wonderful experience up in Seattle where I live. So there's a lot of things available for indie publishers. How many of you dream of publishing traditionally? Okay, good. So we have experts here who can help you with both of those, as can I. So the first thing I'm going to start off with is just a little introduction from the book. This particular paragraph, I think we worked on this for maybe 3 months, crafting every single word as if it were poetry. So I love to read it as if, so that it shows the work that we put into it. A memoir is like a love story, with all the ecstasies, disappointments, and turning points of any relationship. And at the end of the book, you might be surprised to discover that the love of your life is your life. The love of your life is your life. Your memoir will open doorways to yourself and the world, to acceptance, awareness, and fulfillment. In memoir, we come home to ourselves and ultimately realize that life makes sense. And with this realization comes the happiness of true understanding. Memoir is always a search for self, and everyone's personal story is rich in drama, relationships, and surprising discoveries. And yet, nobody comes to us and says, I'm writing a book about myself. They say, I'm writing a book about surviving cancer. I'm writing a book about my family, surviving my family. I'm writing a book about how I traveled the world in a sailboat. I'm writing a book about how I moved to Portland from New York and my life began. So, along the way, it's a bit of a shock to some people to discover that you are the main character of the memoir. When I was writing my first memoir called Build Me an Ark, A Life with Animals for Norton, I was really amazed when my editor said, yes, it's wonderful that you've witnessed wolves and whales and dolphins and cats and dogs. What a wonderful mirror you're holding up to these animals, and they are holding up to you. But you know, you have to grow and change during this book because you are the main character, and the payoff for the reader, as Sarah Jane is always fond of saying, is how you grew and changed, and how you then helped others to change. Now that may sound like a bit of a formula, and I suppose it is, but as we were talking about in class just last night, so many people are so excited just to get their life on the page that they forget there's a reader who is looking for something for having slogged through this book with you. And that is the takeaway. That's your hard-won insights. That's your wisdom. That's what your gift is to your reader. And unless you grow and change, if you just have this one-note samba, I got hurt, I got hurt, I got hurt, it's what Sarah Jane calls the misery memoir. Now, it isn't that we wouldn't write about our sadnesses or our losses or our death, but it's that as we write about it, we show how we survived. As Maya Angelou said, how I got over. How I got over. She said she stood on the shoulders of the middle passage, those who had gotten over on the middle passage. And when she got really low or when she got really frightened, she would stand taller because she was standing on their shoulders. You have a responsibility as a memoirist to let others stand on your shoulders. And if you look at those 10 tips for writing successful memoir, you will see that on the back, what Oprah picked up, which I was very happy to see, was some of the writing prompts that show how you survived, were resilient, and how you yourself can now help others. So look, I have survived blank because of my blank, right? Fill in those blanks. It was not until my encounter with blank that I understood blank. We just did this exercise about 2 weeks ago. After my experience with loss, sickness, broken heart, abuse, betrayal, you name it, I finally got it. I got it. And I recognized that I learned most when I was blank. There were over 2,000 likes or shares of this, and that makes me so happy. I'm thrilled that people are using this book to transform their lives and use their life story as a gift to others, because we're all in this life together. And another thing that is not on this that I want to give you that has been a very successful writing prompt comes from a chapter, it's chapter 5 actually. Turn to your hymnals, please, to page 52. Showing up, creating a character of self. Now, I've said that you are the main character in your book, and I've said that you have to create a character. How do you do that? How do you just suddenly, if you were fiction writers, you knew you would have to do that. But sometimes you just say I, and you expect everyone knows who I is. They don't. Your first assignment as a memoirist, wherever you are in your book, is to write a character sketch of yourself. Alicia, do it. Do it in third person, so you can be a master storyteller, an omniscient narrator. Do it in first person. So it'd be, she was a young woman who believed that everything belonged to somebody else. See? Automatically you have a sense of this character. So if you don't grow and change in the telling of your life, the reader will never understand who you were or the narrative arc of who you became. You should understand yourself more at the end of the memoir than you did at the beginning. You will change, I promise you. And I think you'll change for the better. There was just an article in the New York Times last week about the appeal of writing memoir. I don't know if you saw that. It's called The Appeal of Writing Memoir, how everyone's writing memoir. Nobody kind of knows why. We have our theories. There was a science article that Lindsay sent last week that when you write, you are healthier. If you have cancer and you write, you have better antibodies. If you are going through some sort of divorce and you write, you do better. You're more resilient. So writing is actually saving your life and then saving others. And I firmly have seen that to be true in all the years of teaching. But how do you get on the page without feeling utterly exposed? Oh no, I look like a jerk. What if it's not just what do people think of me? They know all this stuff about me. I mean, it's a little disconcerting when I'll go someplace and they'll say, oh, I'm so sorry about your family. And they've never met me. And I'll go, oh yeah, they read, I want to be left behind. Now let me ask a question to all of you. How many of you see yourself in your memoir, your life story, as a tragic heroine? A tragic hero or a tragic heroine? How many of you see yourself as a picaresque character? Picaresque, bumbling along, like Pickwick. Kind of, well, then I did this, and I figured that out, and then I did this, and I really screwed up, but then I figured out this. That's a picaresque character, and I think that's most of us. Tragic heroes are kind of boring, unless they're written by Sophocles, Euripides. I think that, again, that one-note samba, I got hurt, after a while, you start thinking, well, so what? So, a way to get your true self on the page is something on page 53 called sidestepping the self. And it's a technique that it took me a long time to develop, and I'm thrilled to pass it on. In memoir, it is usually the first person or I who narrates the story. In the same way an actor will create a character for the stage, you can craft a character of yourself on the page. But remember that you as the writer are slightly detached and different from the I on the page. Yes, you're getting that. This person is in fact a carefully constructed replica of yourself. It is another creature altogether, a sympathetic and fully realized companion, an artfully portrayed character who is you, but not all of you. For example, in my morning class, someone was writing a travel memoir, and it came out during the discussion that this person had had an abortion. So the big discussion was, is this relevant to the travel memoir that you had an abortion? No, it was not. And the minute she took that out, it was a flashback. The whole thing took off. It's not that it was more superficial. It was that that was a block for her. And it was bringing her and the story into this place where it didn't want to go. So there are ways, for example, in Build Me an Ark and in I Want to Be Left Behind, I don't talk about my love life. I barely understand it. How can I talk about it with others? And I don't think it's that interesting. So I made the conscious decision that my love life is out of the books. If I want to write about it, I'll write about it in fiction. Because I'm also a novelist. So, and I can also, sometimes you can tell the truth more in fiction than you can in nonfiction. But I really, really wanted to come back around and revisit this family. I had talked about them in that New York Times notable book, Duck and Cover, which is very funny, darkly funny. And they loved it because it was fiction. But I really wanted to go back, and I wanted to write about them in nonfiction as a memoirist. I had to kind of gather my courage. And I also wanted to get my humor on the page and look at their religion, which is Southern Baptist. And it wasn't until, I have to give credit right now to Maureen, because I had finished this, I had sold the book, it was almost ready to go to press. I had about maybe 3 weeks left of the final edit. And I asked Maureen, who is a finishing editor for me. She can take you from beginning to end, but for me, I always ask her to be a finishing editor. And I said to her, will you read this? It's been bought, it's going to be published, I'm so excited about it. And you can revisit this when we get to the panel and tell maybe the real truth. But my version of it is that she thought that I had not really turned that same critical, irreverent, and humorous, darkly comic eye on myself. I was a bit of a tin Jesus. So she said, what happened to your humor about yourself? You know, you've used it with your family, it's the way you've survived them. What about looking at yourself that way? And I went, hey, she's right. And I only have 4 weeks. And I wrote 100 new pages. I was a maniac. And I wove those pages through I Want to Be Left Behind. And I think it was the making of the book. And I thank Maureen for that honesty and courage when I was that far along to tell me the truth. So another story I'll tell you later about this Celtic editing crew over here, about Marlene in Living by Water, since some of you have read that. But I want to give you, before we go to the panel, this great exercise that I gave my class, and then I did it myself in the writing of I Want to Be Left Behind. And it totally, totally changed the book and gave me my narrative tone. You know, narrative tone is really important. It's not your interior, how you talk to yourself, you schmuck. You know, no one wants to read that. You have to develop a tone that is somewhat fondly detached, almost like an omniscient storyteller, who looks at the younger self and says, ah, that younger self. She just didn't understand. She hadn't lived long enough. I wish I could reach back and help her, but it's my younger self. So that tone I was looking for. And here's the exercise. Please write it down. I did not know that I was a rather blank, comma, blank, comma, and blank child. I did not know that I was a rather blank, comma, and blank child. When you fill in those blanks, you will have not only what I call the mature narrator, but that sense of the storyteller about the character of the self. And it will help you so much if you keep filling that out throughout the entire arc of your book. Do it as a teenager, do it as an elder, do it as an adult. So this is how I did it, and I Want to Be Left Behind. And you'll hear, I was thrown out of Sunday school at the age of 8. And it was because at some point, Mrs. Eula, who was very frightening with this shock of Lucille Ball red hair, she suddenly said, "Children, get down on your knees and pray. I've lost my contact lens. Dear God, please help us find this contact lens." And the children were scurrying around, and I sat in my chair and I said, "God's busy." So I got thrown out of Sunday school. And this was the scene right before that happened. "Yesterday I witnessed a miracle," I confided in a small voice to Mrs. Eula, who was still leaning near me. "I saw a squirrel flying between 2 trees, and I realized that God was giving me a sign. But I don't know quite yet what it means. Do you, Mrs. Eula?" For a moment, Mrs. Eula's eyes also shifted toward the lunch table, especially the abundant dessert table. No one has desserts like a Southern Baptist. Pecan pie, strawberry rhubarb pie. That and the singing are what I miss. "I do not think God is speaking to you through some flying squirrel," she sighed, and shook her dazzling red head. Mrs. Eula gave me a long, direct look that I had recognized. I had seen this puzzled scrutiny before and had interpreted it to myself so that it didn't hurt so much. I didn't realize that I was an odd, rather wild, and unknowingly subversive child. I didn't realize that I was an odd, rather wild, and unknowingly subversive child. When I wrote that, I suddenly was outside looking back at myself, looking at this child from Mrs. Eula's point of view, and I suddenly understood with much more humor and compassion and forgiveness my family. Because to them, I was an invasive species. I was like kudzu growing amidst them and had to be continually cut back. And that gave me the humor, the narrative tone, and everything I needed. This was on page 16, and when I wrote that, I knew I had the voice for the rest of the book. So that's a little bit of the teaching in this book. And I'm now going to invite my esteemed panel to join me, all of whom have written memoir, edited memoir, and are here to help me answer questions. So, from the audience, please, any questions?